Our next panelist is Margaret Vaughan, founder and president of MCV Consulting, specializing in multi-generational family legacy and leadership planning and corporate strategic planning. A highly accomplished designer and facilitator of collaborative planning processes with 20 years of international experience in her field, Margaret is sought out by a sophisticated client base of wealth owners, senior executives, and boards of directors. Her work has taken her throughout North America, Europe, Australia, South Africa, and the Middle East. Business and wealth-owning families, whether in their first generation, third, sixth, or beyond, rely on Margaret to help them map the successful transition of the enterprise to the next generation. She is often referred by families' trusted advisors who recognize the need for their clients to have critical conversations and make important decisions that prove challenging to tackle on their own. Margaret is known for her ability to facilitate the articulation of diverse and often opposing perspectives towards a shared, cohesive vision of the family's future around which they align and become motivated to co-create. So help me join Margaret, and she can tell us a little bit more about what she does and what she's learned from doing that.
Thank you. All right, well, it is really a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm a second-generation landowner in Texas. My family owns a farm in Washington County. But I'm here today in the capacity of somebody who goes around the world working with families who are transitioning their leadership of a particular domain in their family enterprise from one generation to the next. So I work with families who are transitioning perhaps around their land, like many of you. Sometimes it has to do with their operating company. It might have to do with their philanthropic foundation, family office, you name it. But whatever it is about helping them bridge that gap from this generation to the next generation. So what I've been asked to talk to you about today are some of those best practices that really can help you get from here to there. Grant makes it sound really easy working with over 100 landowners, but as many of you know and are living, that is not easy to do. Let me just get a sense from you. How many of you all are first generation landowners here in this room? Second generation? Third generation landowners? Okay, fourth generation or greater. Okay, so are many of you, most of you, show of hands, if you are co-owning with a cousin consortium? Okay, or multiple generations. Co-owners with multiple generations. Okay, so complexity is the name of the game, and diversity. You're dealing with the law of numbers here. Okay, so my job is to help you all not get in your own way. So we've already heard from Rael and Miriam. And you know it, there are so many external factors and challenges that are kind of working against you, keeping your land intact and passing it on intact from one generation to the next. Don't let yourselves add to, stack the deck against yourselves. So I'm going to talk to you, hopefully, fairly briefly here today about kind of a roadmap, and this is again, best practices for how you can navigate this transition. So next slide, Jenny, thanks. So I'm going to take you through 7 steps in this transition from planning to moving it along to the next generation. Next slide, Jenny. All right, step 1 is simply initiating the conversation. How many of you have found this difficult to do? Starting the conversation about how do we even begin planning for the transition to the next generation? Have some of you found just having the conversation difficult? Okay, that is often very much the case. Ideally, it is the current leader or leaders in charge today who would initiate that conversation, but oftentimes those folks really don't want to. There are a variety of factors for why they may not be bringing it up. So other family members find that they can be frustrated trying to get that conversation even started. Once you've started the conversation, then where do you go? So let's go to the next slide, please. The next step is creating a shared vision of where you want to go together. This is critical. Every single generation of your family should be doing this. Every single generation is going to have a different view of what it means to be together and stay together, what you want to accomplish together. You have to answer that question. Why do we want to stay together? And the answer really has to be more than just to keep the land together. You've got to find the glue that really pulls your family together. And I'll tell you, in all the years I've been doing this, I have never encountered a family that didn't have glue beyond the co-ownership of the asset, in this case, the land. You have the glue. It's just a matter of figuring out what it is together. This vision piece is critical. And let me just say this. I come in and work with families sometimes who are going to go through all 7 steps that I'm talking about here this afternoon. Sometimes I come in and just work with a family on 1 step. You're going to be hearing from Marshall Bowen in just a moment, and I worked with his family on this particular step over the last couple of years. This is crucial. In coming up with your vision of where it is you want to go together as a family, you've got to start with a look at where you've been. So we help families create something called a history map, where you literally, we have a wonderful, very talented artist who comes in, works with the family. We bring in all generations, all living generations of the family, and the family creates a visual, a timeline of the history of the family, where you are able to tell the story. You're telling the story of your family in a way that allows you to identify the patterns that have played out over time. Some of these patterns are positive and they serve you very well. Some of these patterns have seen their day and it's time to leave them behind. You're able to uncover the values. You know, what is your family really in service of? And those deep tacit operating principles that really do drive behavior, they drive decision making, they drive the way you interact with one another and with the external world. So we bring those to the surface. And I can't emphasize enough the power of telling your collective story as a family. It's really sacred territory to get to walk on with families when they're creating these history maps. And I've heard some incredibly fascinating and very, very powerful stories. And it is not at all uncommon to hear one generation member say, you know, Uncle Gene, I had no idea that you had gone through that. I have never heard that story before. And for Uncle Gene to say, you know, I don't know that I've ever told that story out loud. It really helps get everybody on the same page and unified about what has brought your family to this point in time and what matters to you that you want to preserve from a legacy standpoint going forward. So we're in talking about where you want to go 20, 30 years out, we really do emphasize starting with a look at where you've been. Okay, next slide. Step 3. Okay, so now we're going to start to get into the nitty-gritty here. So talking about what are some of the leadership transition challenges that we know we're going to encounter. Let's go ahead, instead of being afraid to talk about them, go ahead and name them. And talk about things that that might happen. Sometimes we employ the methodology of scenario planning in this process because scenarios, again, are stories. They're actually, they're plausible stories, but they are just that. They're stories about what could happen in the future. You're not trying to forecast or predict the future, but you are saying, yeah, this could happen. This series of events could unfold in such a way that really wouldn't be so great for our family, or it would be really, really great. It allows you oftentimes to talk about some very difficult subjects, such as death, such as failure, such as some exogenous forces coming in and forcing change that you really don't want. It allows you to talk about those and deal with them kind of in the abstract, but in a very real, constructive way that then lets you, as a group, say, okay, what are the strategic implications of that? If those things came to be, what would we need to dial back to today and start putting in place to make sure that we impacted the future in as positive a way for our family's property as possible, and our family itself. All right, next slide, step 4. Once you've talked about some of these challenges in the leadership transition, it's then time to talk about what are the skills we need. What leadership skills do we need for that next generation? We're all talked about the differences with the millennials. We are all talking about the millennials. If you are one of them, we're talking about you all the time. They do. They think differently. They act differently, and they are coming on in a big way. The one thing that you can know about millennials in general is that if they don't like it, they're going to take action. So being quiet, sweeping this under the rug, kicking the can down the road, this does not work for millennials. They're just not going to stand by and let that happen. So starting to have the conversations with them is really crucially important. Do not wait for what we call trigger events, such as a death or a serious illness or some black swan event that comes in from the outside and forces you to have these conversations. Have them before it becomes personal, especially around this subject, leadership skills. So the leadership skills that are going to be needed to own and manage, govern your land over the coming decades, they're going to be different, right, than the ones that have that exist today and have historically for so many reasons, technology being just one of them. So talk about and identify what those skills are. It's not just about what's going on in the external environment. It has to do with what's going on in your family. So we look at the size of your family. You know, how many generations are you dealing with? How many branches are you dealing with? How much geographic dispersion do you have? And then we get into, once you've identified what those skills are, then you can do a gap analysis. And it may sound counterintuitive, but the more open and honest and candid you are about the skill sets that are needed in that next generation, the easier it then is to have the conversations around the skill sets that exist and, very importantly, don't exist in that next generation. You have to have those conversations. As you move along, many of you have no doubt already learned this, bringing in, mixing in with your family some professional external resources, managers, is often a really important way to go. Some families don't want that, but you've got to talk about it. If you don't have inside your family the existing skills that you need for the next generation, you absolutely have to start addressing that now, whether it's by bringing that expertise in from the outside or cultivating it from within the family through training and development. All right, let's go to step 5. This is about your decision-making and governance, and I think that is what, is it Ruthie, you were asking about? This becomes more and more difficult and more and more important, honestly, as you move down from one generation to the next, simply, again, because of your law of numbers. So as your numbers increase, number of owners, it becomes more important to formalize these decision-making and governance structures. Every family really has to answer the question, and again, really within every generation, you have to answer the question, how do we define fairness and equity? Some family members are perfectly fine, or some families rather, are perfectly fine voting, just taking the good old democratic way of electing your leaders. Other family members could not imagine voting against, Cousin Sally and then sitting down and having Thanksgiving dinner with her in the next week. So you have to come up with, I spend a lot of time working with families on designing these kinds of governance and leadership selection mechanisms that are specifically designed to meet the culture and needs of your family. Again, it's just absolutely critical that you understand how you make decisions. Some decisions you may say, we have to be completely unanimous on this. Other decisions, it's okay if we have majority, and others, it's okay if we let Grant make that decision, and he can report out to us. But you're going to need to look at your decision-making structure, communicate what it is, and really make sure that you've got active participation in it. Okay, step 6. Developing your leaders. I talked about this a little bit already. Once you've got your skill sets identified, figure out how you're going to develop leaders. Sometimes this is happening already, just organically. If you're working with that next generation on the land, it may be happening. But be very careful. I have seen so many very sad repercussions of unintentional consequences. Sometimes family members are wanting to protect the next generation from something that they experienced or didn't get to experience themselves. And by doing that, they actually rob that next generation of an opportunity that next gen member might want to have. So it's important to talk to the next generation and ask them how involved they want to be once they become of a certain age where you can have that conversation with them. And be really careful about equal opportunity here. Again, look at your geographic distribution, your age distribution, your gender distribution, and weigh all of that. Do be very careful about making assumptions about the future based on how you've done things in the past. Okay? All right, and then step 7 is about measuring your success. This is where you really, once you have your leaders selected and they're in place, you want to make sure that you and they know what is expected of them. What are those goals that they are expected to reach, and how you're going to measure their success, and then have a very constructive feedback loop, effective feedback loop. This is hard in families. It is very hard. Again, Grant said, I think he says he was being polite probably when he said yes, we get constructive feedback. Sometimes it doesn't come in the most constructive form. It works better if you have, again, some more formalized mechanisms for offering those family members that evaluation and feedback, and for them to give the rest of the family feedback. Because the family members who are in that leadership or leadership roles are undergoing stresses and challenges that the rest of the family simply cannot appreciate if they're not standing in their shoes. One final thing I think I'll say here you all referenced it a little bit with absentee owners. When you're talking about governance, it's really important to identify clearly the rights, roles, and responsibilities of active owners versus passive owners, because not all ownership is equal, right? So again, this is going to be very, it's going to be very specific to your family, what that looks like, but getting that detailed out, understood, and communicated will be very, very essential.